Hello everyone, I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in. Close your eyes and let's begin. Story 1. The man in the black Honda. It was supposed to be just another early morning shift. At 17, I started working in a bikini coffee stand against the wishes of my parents. The pay was excellent, the hours flexible enough for school, and with tuition looming, I needed the money. These drive-through espresso stands, common in Seattle, weren't your ordinary cafes. Neon-painted and snug, they required their baristas to wear revealing outfits. Bikinis, lingerie, or something suggestively themed. It was strange, sure, but in time I got used to it. The customers were a mix of regulars, tired workers, and yes, the occasional creep, but it was just part of the job. My parents disapproved, but they couldn't afford to pay for college, and I had to earn my own way. So when the boss offered me the busiest morning shift, starting at 4 a.m., I took it. I thought the routine became predictable. Get there early, grind the espresso, restock, clean, and be ready for Dave in his red sports car by 4:45. That morning, though, was different. It was my first shift alone. I arrived a little early, 3:30 instead of 4. Oh, clock, just to give myself time to settle in without another girl to help. The parking lot was dark, quiet and empty save for one dim street lamp and another barely flickering in the distance. The bulb directly over the stand had burned out days before. I unlocked the tiny building, punched in my access code, and flipped on the music like usual. It kept me company in the silent darkness. As the sink began to fill with water and the espresso grinder hummed, I began restocking and taking inventory. Everything was silent except the soft noise of prep. But then, something cut through, barely audible over the grinder and running water. A faint tapping sound on the sliding glass window. I paused, unsure if I was imagining it, but the tapping returned, more urgent, deliberate. My chest tightened. I checked the time, 4:15. The stand wasn't open for another 15 minutes, and the floodlights were still off, which meant no one should be there. My heart began to thump faster as I approached the window, unable to see anything through the tinted glass. Telling myself it was probably Dave being impatient, I flipped on the floodlights and stepped toward the window. That's when I saw him, a man standing unnervingly close, his forehead pressed to the glass, hands cupped around his eyes, staring in at me. I jumped back. "We're not open yet," I called out, trying to mask the fear in my voice. 15 more minutes. He didn't respond at first, just kept staring. Then, with an eerie calmness, he smiled slightly and said, "Oh, I can wait." He returned to his car, a small black Honda, and sat there in silence. The stand felt colder now, heavier with unease. I busied myself to distract from the rising anxiety, but kept glancing at the car. 4:30 arrived. I switched on the open sign and, like clockwork, the Honda pounded. The man wore a red baseball cap, a thermal shirt and pajama pants. Something about his demeanor was wrong. Too casual, too confident. "What can I get you this morning?" I asked. He looked at me slowly, eyes dropping below my face. "What I want," he said, "isn't on the menu." Trying to deflect, I laughed nervously and suggested a mocha, but he didn't laugh. His expression turned rigid. "I want you to come to my house, dressed as a maid, nothing underneath," he said. "And if you don't clean it right, I'll punish you." I froze. Every instinct told me to run. "I'm not a nice guy," he added, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Then he smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile people make when they're joking or flirting. It was sinister, slow, like he was savouring my fear. I slammed the window shut and bolted to the back of the stand, hands shaking as I tried to call my boss. No answer. Again and again I called. Still nothing. When I finally dared to peek outside, the Honda was gone. In its place was Dave's red sports car. I had never been so relieved to see that sleazy grin. I rushed to tell him what had happened, but he laughed it off, suggesting the guy was just weird and probably harmless. Then he looked down at my tip jar and froze. "You just opened," he said, "but your tip jar's already full." I looked at him, confused. He reached into the metal canister and pulled out a white envelope, stuffed and sealed. A wave of nausea rolled over me. "It's from that guy," I whispered. "I'm not opening it." Dave, suddenly serious, put on gloves and opened the envelope. Inside was a thick stack of $20 bills, bound by a rubber band, and a note, handwritten, childlike, riddled with spelling mistakes. It was a contract, of sorts, a twisted message filled with threats and promises. It described exactly what he wanted me to do. In terrifying, vivid detail, how he'd examine me, tie me up, punish me, and then bros. "You can scream," it said, "but no one will hear you." The note ended with a line that turned my blood cold. "This is your first payment. By reading this note and accepting the money, you agree." The implication was chilling, that my consent was assumed and my rejection would be punished even more harshly. I dressed quickly and called the police. My boss finally answered and told me to meet the officers at the station. There I handed over the money and the note. The officer in charge, a woman, didn't seem to grasp the gravity of it. She suggested I quit my job, as if that would make it all go away. But I'd been working there nearly every day for years and had never experienced anything like this. My boss reviewed the security footage, which showed the man arriving long before opening, lingering outside for nearly an hour. He pressed his face against the glass, staring in. He roamed, paced, and at one point appeared to be touching himself. His license plate was obscured by paper. The police agreed it was serious. They sent an undercover officer to sit outside the stand the next day while I worked. If he came back, I was to flick the open sign off and on. That shift passed uneventfully. But the man wasn't gone. That was only the beginning of a nightmare that would follow me for a year. He returned again and again. He left gifts at work, at home, sometimes notes, sometimes objects too disturbing to describe. He used the name Turner. My co-workers began to notice. One of them confessed he had offered her money for my personal information. She was later arrested for prostitution. The police remained ineffective, shrugging it off as something that would fade. But it didn't. One night, someone left a joint in my tip jar, something that happened from time to time. I smoked it before bed. Within minutes, I was hallucinating. Visions of fire, demons, screaming ghosts. I ended up in the hospital. The joint had been laced with PCP. Days later, Turner texted me, gloating, suggesting we smoke together sometime. The number was from a burner phone. I gave it to the police, but they did nothing. He began showing up again, naked in the drive-thru once, touching himself in women's underwear. One time he cornered me in the freezer behind the stand. Each time, I called the police. Each time they failed to act. Eventually I had to leave. I changed my name, relocated, scrubbed my work history. Bikini baristas were being smeared in media scandals and jobs were scarce. I wanted a clean start, but even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd find me again. The paranoia never left. I developed habits, checking locks twice, carrying pepper spray, screening every unfamiliar car. It became a part of life. I felt like I was living in a field of rattlesnakes. You adapt, you avoid them, but you always hear the rattling. Years later, I heard that a man matching Turner's description had been arrested for attacking another barista in the Pacific Northwest. Details were similar. Notes, stalking, nudity. They never released his name, so I can't be sure, but I hope it was him. I hope he's finally locked away where he can't hurt anyone else. I still don't sleep well. Sometimes I wake up and think I see headlights in the driveway. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever feel safe. But I survived, and that has to be enough for now. Story 2. The behavioral health sitter. Hospitals at night are quiet in a way that doesn't feel peaceful. They carry a hume of fluorescent light, a soft rhythm of beeping machines, and an undercurrent of stories no one wants to hear. I worked as a CNA in Missouri, helping patients with vitals, documenting their inputs and outputs, doing whatever they needed. The job, though monotonous, was manageable, until you were called to be a sitter. Sitters are assigned to patients considered high risk, those on suicide watch, with violent histories, or just erratic enough that they need constant monitoring. One evening, I was sent to the behavioral health unit, a place already distant from town, pushed closer to the Kansas border. It had been relocated after a tornado destroyed the old facility, and now it felt more like a forgotten outpost than part of the hospital. There were no city lights out there, only stars and the occasional cry of a coyote in the distance. It looked and felt like the set of a horror movie, especially on an overnight shift. When I arrived, I was briefed by the day tech. She seemed relaxed, even a little dismissive. "He's super polite," she said of my patient. "Held the door open for me and everything. I don't even know why he needs a sitter." She mentioned he'd gotten into a fight, but nothing serious. From her tone, I figured it was going to be an easy night. Still, the behavioral health ward had always unsettled me. I usually worked cardiac, but tonight I was in the men's area of the psych ward, watching over someone who, on the surface, seemed calm. The patient greeted me kindly, called me ma'am, asked about my tattoos. He had a bear tattooed on his arm and was proud to show it off. The longer we talked, the more I started to relax. He seemed normal, maybe a little intense, but harmless. When bedtime came around 9 p.m, he climbed into bed without protest. I took my seat in the corner of the room, tucked near an outlet to charge my Kindle, and tried to settle in for the night. I didn't realize how isolated I had made myself until later. I was wedged into the furthest corner from the door with my back against the wall, the only alarm button clipped loosely to my scrubs. At some point it must have slipped off. Around 1 a.m. the man stirred. He sat up in bed and stared at me. His eyes were wide, dark, unreadable. I smiled politely and told him the time, suggesting he still had hours to rest. He didn't say much, just kept watching me. Then he asked if he could call his parents. He needed to tell them something. I explained that he could call in the morning, that it was hospital policy. He nodded slowly, the same blank look on his face. I didn't know what to make of him. Part of me thought he was lonely, maybe scared. I reminded myself he hadn't done anything aggressive. Still, something didn't sit right. That stare lingered too long. That smile never reached his eyes. Around 3 a.m, I finally took my lunch break with the nurse assigned to my patient. As we ate in the break room, she casually said something that changed everything. "I can't believe you're in there with him," she said. I paused, confused. "I mean, all things considered." I asked her what she meant. She blinked. "Did no one tell you? He was admitted after threatening to murder his parents. Escalated over months. Started with phone threats, then brought a gun to dinner. They found mutilated animal corpses on their doorstep. When they raided his trailer, the walls were covered in blood and feces. Dozens of gutted animals just lying there." My stomach turned. I was silent. The sweet, polite man I had been watching all night had left behind a house of horror. Suddenly, everything about his stillness, his silence, his stares, none of it felt innocent anymore. It felt predatory. It felt like calculation. And I was trapped in his room, back to the wall, with no alarm and no one to hear me scream. The nurse shrugged, probably assuming I'd known. I returned to the room, my hands shaking. He was still awake, sitting upright in bed. This time he didn't say anything, just watched me as I entered. I took my place in the corner, heart pounding. I thought about the stories, the blood, the animals, the threats. I thought about the fact that he had been quiet, not because he was kind, but because he was waiting. The minutes passed like hours. He didn't sleep again, just sat there, occasionally twitching, eyes fixed on mine. Every time I shifted in my chair, his gaze followed. I thought about my alarm lying on the floor near his bed, too far to reach without passing close to him. I was trapped. No cell phones allowed, no way out. I began counting the seconds under my breath, just to keep calm, just to keep from falling apart. As dawn approached, he finally lay back down. I didn't move. I sat rigid in my chair, bones aching from stillness, afraid to even breathe loudly. When the day shift came to relieve me, I stood slowly and stepped into the hallway. My knees were weak, my head light, but I kept my face neutral. I didn't want him to see fear. I didn't want him to know he'd gotten to me. As I walked back to the nurse's station, the nurse from earlier gave me a sad smile. "You made it," she said. I nodded. Barely. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had almost happened. That night had been a coin toss, and I didn't even know I was playing. That politeness can be a mask, that monsters sometimes speak softly, that you don't always recognize danger when it's sitting right across from you. I found out later that he was moved to a different facility, somewhere more secure, somewhere with more experienced staff. But the image of him sitting in bed, eyes unblinking, lips barely parted, stayed burned in my mind. I realized how easily things could have gone differently. If he had decided to attack, no one would have reached me in time. If I had moved too quickly, startled him, challenged him, it might have ended in blood. I've had patients bite me, kick me, grope me, but none of them scared me like he did, because he didn't have to lift a finger to terrify me. He just had to sit there, silent, staring, smiling when no one else was around. That's a kind of fear that doesn't fade. It roots into your nervous system and shows up in dreams, in crowded rooms, in late-night shadows. From that day forward, I never took another sitter assignment without checking the full report. I made sure my alarm was clipped tight, my phone charged and accessible. I sat closer to the door, never boxed in. It wasn't just about policy, it was about survival. It's easy to forget that some people are broken in ways you can't see. That politeness is not a guarantee of safety. That danger doesn't always raise its voice, sometimes it whispers. And when you hear that whisper echoing in a quiet hospital room, you learn to listen. You learn to trust your instincts. That night was a lesson I never forgot. The hospital never apologized. The nurse who had told me laughed it off, saying I handled it better than most. But I wasn't looking for praise. I was looking for peace. I never found it in that job again. I stayed a little while longer, but eventually moved on to a different hospital, a different department. Somewhere with windows, with light, with people nearby. I still think about him sometimes. I wonder if he's still locked away, or if he's out, walking around, holding doors open, smiling, saying "ma'am" to unsuspecting nurses. And I wonder if they'll see past it in time. I hope they do. Because danger doesn't always knock. Sometimes it's already in the room, sitting in silence, waiting for you to blink. Story 3, Jack with the shotgun. It was supposed to be just a simple blind date, nothing serious, just a kind gesture from a co-worker who thought I needed to meet someone new. I was 23 years old, living on the West Coast, juggling college and part-time work, not at all focused on dating. Valentine's Day was coming up, and I didn't have any special plans. That's when my co-worker introduced me to Jack. She said he was a nice guy, single, and looking to meet someone kind. So Jack and I exchanged a few calls and finally met in person. He brought me flowers and candy and seemed charming at first. Tall, well-spoken, handsome, with a brilliant smile. He even said, "You're my girl now," the very first time we met. A strange thing to say, but I shrugged it off. He was polite, attentive, and said all the right things. In the beginning it felt harmless. In fact, I thought he might just be one of those overly sweet types. I didn't know how wrong I was. We spent the next few weeks together, but Jack's sweetness quickly started to change. He grew quiet in social situations, avoided my friends and family, and kept trying to isolate me. He wanted to know what I was doing at all times, questioned me if I was busy, and always needed to be included in everything. He wasn't physically abusive, but the psychological control was tightening around me like a noose. The worst part was how subtle it all was. He wasn't yelling or violent. He just inserted himself into every part of my life and sulked when he wasn't invited. Then one day he told me he loved me. I barely knew him. I laughed it off, but he didn't laugh with me. The following week, he got down on one knee and proposed, no ring, just words. He said we could marry now and buy a ring later. I was shocked and told him we should wait, that we barely knew each other. He agreed, smiling quietly. I thought we had an understanding. But just a week later he proposed again. Still no ring, still the same pressure. I started to realize how fast he was trying to pull me into his world and how little he cared about mine. I told him we needed a break, just some space to think things through. He didn't fight it. In fact, he smiled again and agreed like nothing was wrong. For a moment I thought it was going to be a clean break. But then, a few days later, I came home to find him sitting on the staircase outside my apartment. He said he was just waiting for me. I told him to go home. He stood, smiled, and left without argument. But he kept coming back. He started showing up outside my place randomly. If I didn't answer, he would knock for half an hour, leave, and come back again. It got so frequent that I had to hide at the neighbor's apartment until he went away. The phone calls were endless. I stopped answering, hoping he'd give up. Eventually, the visits stopped. Months passed with no sign of him, and I finally started to relax. But then, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I picked up, and it was Jack. He wanted to see me again. He said he'd told his mother about me, and that she wanted to meet me. That's when I lost it. I told him never to call me again, to lose my number, to stay away. He didn't listen. He showed up again, knocking on my door. Each time, I had someone else answer and tell him I wasn't home. Each time, he nodded, smiled, and left. But the third time he came, he pushed it too far. My best friend told him I wasn't home, and he asked if he could come inside and wait. She told him no. He tried to force his way in. She yelled for me. I rushed out, and together we shut the door. My heart was pounding. I told him I would call the police if he did. He mumbled something and walked away. I didn't call the police that night, a decision I regret deeply. 5 or 6 months later, it was a quiet Saturday afternoon. My 2 younger sisters, ages 14 and 17, were visiting me. I had a migraine and stayed in bed, with my bedroom door open, so I could hear what was going on in the apartment. I could hear them watching a movie, talking about Tom Cruise and laughing at the screen. Outside, the sounds of children playing drifted in. Everything felt calm. I took more aspirin and dozed off, but I was startled awake by a loud, sharp bang. I thought it might be a kid bouncing a ball off the wall. Then I heard it again, another bam, followed by my sister yelling, "What the hell was that?" I sat up, confused, and then I heard a man's voice shout, "Get the..." My blood ran cold. Screaming followed. I didn't know what to do. My instincts kicked in. I didn't know how many people were out there, or if they were armed, so I slowly closed my bedroom door, shoved a dresser in front of it, sat on the floor and called 911. I told the operator someone had broken in and was threatening my sisters. While I was on the call, I heard the man shouting, "Where's your sister? She doesn't know what I had to do for her. I love her." Then I heard, "She's in the room." My heart nearly stopped. They told him where I was. I heard footsteps approaching, then a violent slam against my door. It shook under the impact. He yelled, "Open the door or I'll kill everyone." I broke down crying, begging the operator to send help. She told me officers were on their way. Time slowed to a crawl. I was trapped. I kept hearing him banging and threatening, and then silence. The next sound I heard was my sister's soft knock, telling me it was okay to come out. He had left. The police arrived shortly after. When I stepped into the living room, the damage was visible. Furniture overturned, papers scattered, fear still lingering in the air. My sisters were shaken, pale, trembling. I asked who it was. They said it was Jack. He had kicked down my door in broad daylight with a sawed-off shotgun and threatened to kill my family. The police caught him a week later. They told me he had been involved in another incident a few weeks prior. He had been firing a shotgun into the air. When confronted, he claimed someone had broken in, stolen his weed, and cut off the tip of his tongue. The officers didn't arrest him then. They just issued him a ticket. But now, they had what they needed. I helped them track him down by giving them a relative's address from the phone book. They found him en route to that house and arrested him. He confessed immediately, but later pled not guilty. He took a plea deal and served 5 years. I moved to another state, trying to put it behind me. But the scariest part was learning years later that when he got out, he moved into a halfway house right across the street from my old apartment, the same one he had broken in. It was as if fate had placed him right back where everything had started. 11 years have passed. I still lock my doors twice. I change my phone number every year. I sleep with pepper spray beside me and a chair jammed under the doorknob. I've never felt fully safe again. No, some scars don't fade. Some experiences change the way you move through the world. I never expected a blind date to spiral into terror. I never expected a smile to turn into a scream. And yet, here I am, alive, hardened, a little more careful, a little more cautious, and always listening for that sound at the door. Story 4. Danny the Hacker. It started online the way so many modern stories do. A friend request, a shared laugh, mutual interest that pulled us into casual conversation. His name was Danny, and I met him through Facebook in 2011. We had mutual friends, people I trusted, which made me let my guard down. I was 18, a bit naive, eager to make connections, and Danny seemed harmless at first. He shared music, told strange jokes, and seemed intelligent in that quirky, unpredictable way. We never met in person. We just talked. He never asked if I had a boyfriend, but I assumed he knew. My profile made it obvious. Pictures, status updates, was all right there. But I quickly learned that assumptions don't protect you. They don't shield you from obsession. One October day he told me how he felt about me. He sent a poem, comparing me to a tapestry, beautiful, elegant, intricate. I didn't know how to respond, so I made a joke. "Wow," I said, "I wish my boyfriend said things like that." That's when everything changed. His response wasn't disappointment, it was rage. He accused me of leading him on, of playing with his heart, of being cruel. He said he had opened his soul to me and I had betrayed him. I was baffled. We'd only been talking for a month. We'd never even met. I decided to give him space, and after a few days he messaged me again, apologetic, a little sheepish. Things returned to normal, or at least what I thought was normal. He was sweet again, funny, clever. I tried to keep the peace, unsure of what might set him off next. He added me on Skype. I didn't like using video, not with anyone, and I told him that. But he kept insisting, kept begging. Then the requests turned dark. He wanted me to Skype with him naked. I said no, again and again. Finally I blocked him, but the messages didn't stop. I received dozens through AI, angry, threatening, manipulative. He told me I was a terrible friend. That's when he told me he was a hacker, that he had friends who were hackers too, that he could destroy my grades, make me fail, ruin my life. I didn't believe him, but I did believe he would try. So I kept him at arm's length. Sometimes we laughed again. Sometimes he was the old Danny. Other times he would snap, sending threats, delivering ultimatums. Talk to me on Skype, or things will get very bad for you. He claimed he could ruin my relationship. I started to panic. I asked our mutual friends about him. Their responses chilled me. He's violent, they said, dangerous, twisted. Worse, he lived just minutes away from the college I attended in Reading, Pennsylvania. Every time I walked across campus, I looked over my shoulder. I scanned crowds for his red hair, his beard, his intense stare. I didn't know what he looked like exactly, but I imagined him in every passing stranger. I changed my Skype account. I blocked him on HIM and Facebook. That only enraged him. Soon, I started getting messages from new accounts. One was from a man named Adam Knowing. No friends, no photos, just threats. "You've been warned," one message read. "You've been informed of your behavioral issues," said another. "Your grades are passing, not for long," came the third. My stomach dropped every time one arrived. Was it Danny? Was it someone else he knew? Was I really in danger? Against my better judgment, I unblocked him. He messaged me again, this time calmer. My boyfriend now knew everything. He told me to go to the police if it got worse, but I wasn't sure they could do anything. Danny hadn't physically harmed me. He hadn't shown up yet, so I began documenting everything. Screenshots, message logs, profiles, just in case. For weeks he alternated between kindness and cruelty. One day he'd compliment me, the next he'd threaten me. After Christmas, I blocked him again. I was done. A few weeks later, another Facebook account messaged me. I don't remember the name, but the message stuck with me. "After careful consideration, you're being let go," it read. "You should thank the one you've wronged. It's only because of his compassion that you're being forgiven so easily." I didn't respond. I just blocked the account and held my breath. And then, silence. Days passed, then weeks. Then something miraculous happened. I woke up one morning to a headline. Danny had been arrested, along with a group of his friends. The charges were horrifying: possession and distribution of child pornography. He had been under investigation for a while. They had evidence. He was indicted in 2013. He was facing up to 60 years in prison. My heart pounded as I read the article. Relief flooded through me, mingled with nausea. I had been messaging a predator, a manipulator, a man capable of terrible things. Even now, I don't know what would have happened if I had given in to his demands, if I had turned on that camera, if I had said yes instead of no. Maybe I would have become another piece of his collection, another victim. But I didn't. I fought back, quietly, carefully. I gathered what I could and held the line, and in the end, justice found him. He's still in prison today, and even if he's released early, he'll be monitored for life. That knowledge brings me a measure of peace, but it doesn't erase the fear he planted. The way I now flinch at unknown friend requests, the way I screen every message, every invitation, the way I hesitate before trusting someone new. He carved that into me, without touching me once. That's the danger of digital predators. They don't need a weapon, they just need access. Danny taught me how terrifying the internet can be, how the line between friendly and dangerous blurs when words are all you see. He taught me that not all red flags wave loudly. Some are quiet, subtle, hidden in compliments and poetry. He made me wary of strangers, of late-night messages, of promises that come too quickly. I look back now and realize how close I came to something much darker, and how easily it could have gone unnoticed. There's no dramatic ending to this story, no confrontation, no courtroom showdown, just a quiet unraveling. and then a knock at his door instead of mine. If I hadn't stood my ground, if I had tried to appease him, if I had given in to keep the peace, I don't know what would have happened. But I'm grateful I didn't. I still have the screenshots. I still have the folder labeled Danny. I don't open it anymore, but I keep it just in case. It's a reminder that trust is earned, not given. That fear can come from behind a keyboard. That safety sometimes means saying no, even when it's uncomfortable. I never thought an online friendship could leave scars, but it did. They're not visible, but they're there. In how I vet people, in how I move through the digital world. I survived a stalker without ever seeing his face. And that, I've learnt, is what makes it all the more chilling. Story 5. The Sleepover with Myra. There are moments in life that divide time into before and after. For me, one of those moments began with something as innocent as a sleepover. I was 20 years old, a university student still living with my parents. I was grateful for them for their protection and love, but they often treated me like their little girl, and it could feel stifling. So when I met Myra, bright, captivating Myra in junior English, it felt like a breath of fresh air. We clicked instantly. She had just moved from Chicago and had this magnetic, almost obsessive energy. She was beautiful, intelligent, and charismatic. I always thought she was prettier than me, but she disagreed, often looking at me with admiration that felt more intense than friendship. Our connection deepened quickly. We discovered we shared some unique quirks, including a secret affection for Barbie dolls, something both of us had carried from childhood into adulthood. For her, it was the design, the craftsmanship. For me, it was nostalgia, a sense of innocence preserved. So when she invited me to her house for a sleepover and encouraged me to bring my favorite dolls, I was more touched than suspicious. It felt like two kids bonding over something the world told us to grow out of. My mum was hesitant, as always, but I reassured her. Myra had promised to meet her soon, and this was just one night. Saturday arrived, and Myra pulled up in a blue Sentra, smiling warmly. She offered me a shot of vodka, Grey Goose, and I laughed and accepted. One turned into 4. I hadn't eaten. I was lightweight. I remember giggling in the passenger seat, the world already wobbling around me. We reached her place, a rundown house on the edge of town, isolated but well kept inside. "It's cheap," she joked. "I'm broke." Inside, everything was immaculately organized, almost obsessively. Books, framed photos, perfectly aligned furniture. She offered me bread and water to sober up, then turned on an episode of Friends. I barely made it to the lime green couch before blacking out. When I opened my eyes, nothing made sense. I wasn't on the couch anymore. I was lying on a hard, dusty basement floor, a thin pillow under my head and a rough wool blanket over my body. The single bulb above flickered dimly, casting long shadows across the concrete walls. My bag of clothes sat nearby, but my bag of dolls was missing. My phone was lying next to a sticky red puddle, dead. I hadn't brought a charger. I didn't plan to stay long. My head was pounding, an unbearable migraine radiating through my skull. I felt cloth wrapped around my head, pain pulsed beneath it. "Myra," I whispered. Nothing. Silence. My voice cracked with dryness. I sat up, slowly, shakily, and crawled toward the boiler's reflective surface in the corner of the room. My reflection was ghastly, sunken eyes, filthy skin, smeared with dirt and dry blood. The bandage wrapped around my head was soaked. My hair was matted or missing, I couldn't tell which yet. I stumbled up the stairs and opened the basement door. The house was eerily empty. All of Myra's things, books, photos, the couch, gone. The structure remained, but the warmth, the personality, the presence, everything was erased. It was like she had moved out in the middle of the night. My wallet was still in my bag. She hadn't robbed me. This wasn't about money. I stepped outside and was nearly blinded by the sun. My eyes narrowed against the afternoon light. I didn't know where I was. The street was dirt, no landmarks, just trees and distant buildings. I started walking. A silver pickup truck drove toward me, dust trailing behind it. I waved frantically. The driver pulled over. An older couple looked at me with concern. "Are you okay?" the man asked. "I don't know," I said, trembling. "I just want to go home." The woman, her voice gentle, offered to take me to the hospital. I refused. I wanted my mom. I just wanted to go home. The truck rolled forward, the old woman climbing into the back with me. "Where to?" the man asked. "Sheridan, Pittsburgh," I replied. The woman sat beside me, hands trembling as she examined the cloth on my head. "I was a nurse for 30 years, she said softly. "Let me take a look." I nodded, weakly. As she peeled back the fabric, I screamed in agony. The pain was excruciating. She gasped and pulled away. A hand flew to her mouth. I sat up, panic rising. "What is it?" I whispered. She pointed, and I looked in the rearview mirror. My scalp was torn, streaked red and pink. My hair gone. My skin infested. A swarm of tiny maggots wriggled across raw flesh. My eyes widened in horror. My ears gone. Just vacant space where they should have been. My hands trembled as I pulled the cloth back further. Blood poured down my face. The woman screamed. The driver swerved and pulled over. "Myra!" I gasped. "She took my hair." My voice was barely audible. The woman cried beside me, trying to hold my shoulders to keep me from fainting. "She took everything," I whispered. "She drugged me, kept me, cut me." The truck turned toward the hospital. I let them. There was nothing else I could do. I didn't know how long I'd been gone. I asked the woman the date. "October 15th, she said gently. My chest tightened. I had been at Myra's since September 28th. I had lost nearly 2 weeks, vanished, with no calls, no search, nothing. Tears poured freely down my face. The nurse kept whispering comforting words, but I couldn't hear them. My ears were gone, and with them something inside me had broken. I felt hollow, violated, unanchored. At the hospital, they confirmed what I feared. I had been unconscious for days. My scalp had been partially surgically removed. The precision, they said, suggested someone who knew what they were doing or had practiced. I had no infections, no signs of sexual assault. It was clinical, controlled, deliberate. But my dolls were never found. Myra had vanished, leaving behind no digital trace. Her name was likely fake, no records, no trail, no prints in the house, no neighbors, no witnesses, nothing. I had been collected, like a doll. And when she was done, she left me behind, broken, forgotten. It haunts me to this day, how someone so warm, so charming, could so easily become a nightmare. I don't tell many people this story anymore. The ones I've told always ask the same question. Why? I don't have an answer. Maybe she was fascinated by the human body. Maybe she saw me as art. Maybe she was simply deranged. All I know is that I survived something I still don't understand. And sometimes, when I pass a stranger with a perfect face or see a child playing with dolls, I wonder how many more there are like her, quiet collectors, waiting for someone naive, someone lonely, someone like me. Story 6. The Halloween Clown. I was 11 years old when I first realized that fear could wear a smile. It was Halloween night, the kind of evening that should have been filled with candy, laughter, and silly costumes. My older sister and her friends, 16, confident, carefree, had agreed to take me trick-or-treating. I was the youngest in the group, tagging along in wide-eyed excitement, darting up porches, tossing candy into my bag, trailing behind them like a little shadow. The streets were glowing with jack-o'-lanterns and porch lights. The wind had that crisp autumn bite. and everyone was wrapped in the warm chaos of the holiday. I was happy, but something was off. From the beginning of our route, I kept turning around, an odd sensation creeping up my spine, as if something or someone was walking just out of sight. The streets were busy with other kids, but I felt watched, and then I saw him. He was dressed as a clown. Not a colourful, goofy one, but something in between funny and disturbing. His costume was simple. Oversized shoes, a white painted face, tattered red jacket, and wide, empty eyes behind the mask. At first, I wasn't scared. I actually liked clowns back then. I figured he was just another guy out trick-or-treating. Maybe older, maybe weird, but harmless. He followed us from house to house, always hanging back a few yards. He never rang any doorbells, never carried a bag for candy. He just stood there, watching. When we crossed the street, he crossed too. When we lingered at one porch, he lingered in the shadows. I told my sister. She thought I was imagining things. But when she looked back and saw him there, unmoving, hands at his side, her face changed. She whispered something to her friend and then quietly suggested we take a different route, just to be safe. We turned down an entirely different street, skipping the houses we had planned to visit. And yet, within minutes, he appeared again, at a distance, still not speaking, still not asking for candy, just watching. My sister, who hated clowns more than anything, decided to call our dad. We kept walking, trying to keep calm, trying to act like we weren't scared. But the tension between us was thick. I could feel it in every hurried step, in every whisper. It was almost 10 p.m. when my dad called back and told us where he was parked. We turned toward that direction, a little relief blooming in our chests. But before we could get there, the clown stepped out from behind a parked car and blocked our path. He didn't run, or scream, or say anything. He just stood there, silently staring. The girls froze. I stood behind my sister, clutching my candy bag. I was a mouthy, fearless kid back then, maybe a little too bold, so I stepped forward and yelled, "Leave us alone!" The clown tilted his head, slow and unnatural like a curious animal. That's when I felt the fear truly settle in. He didn't respond. He didn't even blink. I grabbed the can of silly string from my sister's hand, held it up and pointed it like it was a weapon. "I'll ruin your costume," I warned, half believing it might actually scare him. He didn't. He took one slow step forward. I pulled the trigger. The silly string burst out and tangled across his mask and jacket. That was enough of a distraction. As he tried to wipe it away, we ran. We ran as fast as we could, down the sidewalk, around the corner, to where my dad was waiting in the car. We tumbled inside, breathless, crying, laughing from the adrenaline. But before my dad could drive away, the clown caught up. He slammed his hands against the back window hard. The sound echoed in my bones. My dad hit the gas and the car jerked forward. I turned in my seat to look out the rear window. The clown was running after us for a few seconds, then stopped in the middle of the street, standing there as we disappeared into the night. That image stayed with me. That motionless figure in the middle of a quiet neighborhood road, face hidden behind smeared makeup, arms by his side like he was waiting for someone else to come along. My dad kept asking if we knew who it was. We didn't. None of us had seen him before, and we never saw him again, but other kids did. In the weeks that followed, word spread through the neighborhood. Stories of a clown chasing children, standing by school fences, appearing outside windows during sleepovers. The police were called several times, but he always vanished before they arrived. Some parents thought it was just Halloween pranksters. Others weren't so sure. I heard rumors at school, kids saying he had been seen digging in the woods behind the park or following school buses home. No one could confirm anything, and eventually the sightings stopped. But I kept remembering that night. How quiet he was, how deliberate. Like it wasn't just a costume. Like it was who he really was underneath. Not someone pretending to be scary for a holiday, but someone who felt most like himself, with a mask on. Years passed. I grew older. My sister moved away. Halloween came and went with new costumes, new memories. But every time I passed that street, I remembered. I remembered how the clown followed us without ever speaking, how he didn't need to touch us to make us feel trapped, how he didn't need a weapon to hold power. He just needed to be there, persistent and patient. Sometimes I wonder who he was, if he was just a man who wanted to scare kids, or if it was something deeper, something darker. Because there's something haunting about a threat that doesn't explain itself. Something terrifying about a face that stares without blinking, without reason. Now, whenever Halloween rolls round, I look a little more carefully at the people on the sidewalk. I study the way they walk, the way they look at others, the way they linger. I still love the holiday. I still smile at the decorations and give candy to kids in costumes. But deep down, I'm always watching, because I know what it feels like to be followed, to be hunted quietly. And I know that sometimes the scariest monsters don't roar. They whisper with their presence, they haunt without words, and they disappear before you can prove they were ever there. Story 7. The Anime Club Stalker. High school can be awkward for anyone, but especially when you're a shy, nerdy teenager trying to find a place to belong. In 2002, I was 14 and just beginning my freshman year. I had always been the kind of person who made friends with the outcasts, the oddballs, the ones who hovered on the edges of social circles. I wasn't trying to be a saint. I just liked being kind to people who seemed like they needed it. That was how I met him. I still don't know his name, not even after all these years. He introduced himself with a whisper, barely audible, and from that moment on, he decided we were friends. It started in the anime club. I was excited to find people who shared my interests, people who liked the same shows, laughed at the same obscure jokes. He sat in front of me on that first day, fidgeting nervously, not talking to anyone. I said hi, just one word, and that was all it took. From that moment, he latched on. At first, he would just find me at lunch. He wouldn't really speak, just stand nearby, mumbling to himself, looking at me with wide, unblinking eyes. His voice was high-pitched and soft, his posture hunched, his presence disarming. He didn't act threatening, just odd. He asked me strange questions about my interests, about my daily habits, and slowly he began to ask about my personal life. I tried to be polite, but inside I was already feeling uneasy. He never looked away. He never smiled normally. It wasn't long before my friends and I started moving to different tables, hiding behind hallways or lockers. But somehow, he always found me. He'd just appear, standing at a distance, watching. If I shifted to another table the next day, he'd already be there waiting. It was like he had memorized my schedule. Every movement I made, he anticipated. After nearly a year of this, my best friend finally had enough. He told me that if I didn't tell the stalker to leave me alone, he would. So one day, when the boy approached me at lunch, my friend stepped between us. "She's not interested," he said firmly. "Go away." The boy looked crushed. His shoulders slumped, and without saying a word, he turned and shuffled away. For a moment I felt bad, but that feeling quickly vanished when I realized how much lighter I felt without him hovering nearby. He disappeared from view after that, though occasionally I would still see him during anime club meetings. He'd sit across the room, never talking, never participating, just staring at me with that same unreadable expression. I avoided his eyes. My friend never let his guard down. He watched him, made sure I was never left alone. But just when I thought the worst was over, things started escalating again. By the time I was 16, I had my own car. I thought I had finally outgrown the shadows of my freshman year. I was driving myself to school, more independent, more confident. But one day, I noticed a beat-up grey car parking uncomfortably close to mine. The next day, it was there again, and then again. I finally saw him sitting in the driver's seat, smiling like nothing had ever changed. He asked how I'd been, if I was going to prom, what I was doing after school. I was stunned. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year. How did he know which car was mine? How long had he been watching? I tried to change my schedule, arrive later, leave earlier. It didn't help. He was always there. Then one day, a childhood friend noticed the car. "Is that your boyfriend?" he joked. I shook my head and told him everything. That boy, bless him, marched right up to the stalker's car, glared him down and threatened to make him disappear if he ever came near me again. It worked, at least for a while. I stopped seeing the grey car near my spot. I stopped seeing him around school. I let myself believe it was over. But my relief didn't last. Junior year, I started driving my best friend Phil to and from school. He lived nearby, so it made sense. One day, he pointed out the same grey car following us after school. We brushed it off as coincidence, but the next day, and the day after, it was behind us again. Finally, we took a weird detour, turning down random streets, doubling back, looping. The car followed every time. Our stomachs dropped. It wasn't coincidence. It was stalking. I went home and told my mum everything. She didn't take it seriously. "You're imagining things," she said. But I knew I wasn't. It was him, still watching, still waiting. And now, he knew where I lived. Toward the end of that school year, our anime club had a final party. I volunteered to host. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to feel normal. Maybe I forgot to fear. When the doorbell rang and my dad let him in, I felt like I couldn't breathe. I never invited him. He spent the entire party hovering around me, chatting with my dad, asking questions like, "Where's her room?" I just smiled tightly and prayed he would leave. After that, I started hearing things. A car outside my house late at night. A knock at the door with no one there. One time, I peeked out my window and saw him standing across the street, motionless, staring. I dropped to the floor and called my friend in tears. Sometimes, he would disappear for weeks. Then he'd show up again. At school, at work, always with a soft voice and those blank eyes. It was like he never understood, or never cared, how terrified I was. Senior year came and went. He graduated before me, and I started to breathe again. I got a job at a local electronics store, started planning for college. I worked in the gaming department, helping customers, stocking shelves. It was routine, predictable, until he walked through the doors. He smiled like we were long-lost friends. Said a buddy saw me there. I panicked. I radioed for help, and a co-worker pulled me into the warehouse. I explained everything. From then on, security kept an eye on him. Every time he came in, they would walkie each other. He never bought anything, just wandered. One of his friends, who we dubbed Ninja Friend, would show up first, texting constantly, scoping the place out. Then 10 minutes later, my stalker would arrive. I tested it, walked around the store randomly. He always found me. One day, Ninja Friend sweated me and called out. My stalker appeared, asked for my number, said he lost it. I never gave it to him in the first place. I scribbled a note instead. "This is where I work. Don't come here again." I handed it to him, shaking. Security escorted him out. He cried, literally cried. I hid in the back, sobbing with fear. After that, security always walked me to my car. But one night, there he was, leaning on his car near mine. Security called the cops. He bolted. But it didn't end. Months later, I was leaving work with friends. We were laughing, carefree, until I heard it. That soft, familiar voice. "Hey." He was back. My friend stepped between us, pretending to be my boyfriend, threatening him. My stalker flinched, ran to his car and drove off. Security watched him every time he came in after that. He never stopped watching me. Even now, years later, I still look over my shoulder in stores. I got married, moved away, started a new life. But the fear never fully left. He stole a piece of my peace, a part of my youth. For over a decade, he haunted my movements, my routines, my sense of safety. I never knew his name, but I knew his eyes. And I still see them sometimes, in dreams, in shadows, in memories that won't let go. Story 8. The Man Behind the Tree. Sometimes, the moments that haunt us most aren't the loud ones. They're the quiet flickers, the subtle scenes that settle in your mind like dust and never leave. I was in college when it happened, living in a rural part of the Pacific Northwest, a place where dense pine forests hugged the town's edges like a dark, breathing wall. I shared a small rental house with 3 other girls, but that winter break, I was the only one who stayed behind. My roommates had gone home to visit family. I needed the solitude. I told myself it would be peaceful, time to study, relax, drink tea and watch movies. The house was small, old and slightly creaky, but I wasn't afraid. I'd always been good at being alone. The first few nights passed uneventfully. Snow fell gently outside and the world felt quiet, still. But then, late one night, I noticed something strange outside my window. Our backyard was small and fenced, bordered by a narrow strip of forest. There was a single tall tree just beyond the property line, the kind of tree that stood out even among the pines, barren, grey-barked, and shaped like it was leaning ever so slightly. I liked that tree. It gave the view some character. But that night, as I was turning off the lights to go to bed, I caught sight of something behind it, a shadow, tall and narrow. I froze. For a moment, I thought it was just the tree itself, catching light differently in the moonlight. But then the shadow moved. Not much, just a slight shift, like someone adjusting their stance. My heart began to race. I stood there for several minutes, barely blinking. Eventually, I convinced myself it was nothing. A trick of the light, a trick of my nerves. I closed the blinds, double-checked the locks, and tried to sleep. The next night, the shadow was there again. Same position, same stillness, except this time, it didn't move. I stared longer, harder, trying to make sense of it. I opened the back door and stepped out onto the porch, shivering in the cold. The forest was quiet. Snow crunched softly beneath my slippers, but there was nothing. The shadow didn't reappear. I went back inside, feeling foolish. Maybe I'd been spending too much time alone. I laughed to myself, turned on some background music and went about my evening. But I started keeping the blinds shut after dark. I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked, just in case. Still, I didn't tell anyone. It felt too vague, too dreamlike. I didn't want to seem paranoid. Then came the third night. I had just finished a movie and was headed to the kitchen for tea when I saw it. Clearer this time, unmistakably human. A tall figure standing just behind the tree, perfectly still, half concealed in the darkness. My body froze. Every instinct screamed danger. I ducked down, heart thundering in my ears, and crawled out of sight of the window. I sat there on the floor for nearly an hour, trembling. When I finally peeked out again, the figure was gone. I locked every door, every window. I put a chair under the doorknob. That night, I slept with a knife by my bed. I told myself I'd call someone in the morning. Maybe the police, maybe campus security. But morning came, and again, I hesitated. What would I even report? A man? Standing near a tree? But the fourth night shattered my hesitation. I was brushing my teeth when I heard a creak. Not from the old floors, from outside. I turned off the faucet and held my breath. There it was again. A slow, deliberate creaking, like footsteps on wood. I tiptoed to the living room window, lifted the blind just an inch, and stared out into the darkness. He was closer now, standing just outside the fence, no longer behind the tree. I could see the outline of his shoulders, his head tilted to one side, not moving, not blinking, just watching. I backed away, slowly, hands shaking so badly I dropped my phone. It clattered loudly on the hardwood floor, and when I looked up again, he was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of my room, clutching the knife, eyes on the door. I kept thinking I'd hear a window shatter, a lock click open, but it never came. The next morning, I packed a bag and drove to stay with a friend off campus. I didn't go back to the house until my roommates returned a week later. When I told them everything, they tried to laugh it off. It was probably just a neighbor, one said, or someone hiking. But I knew what I saw. And then one of them found something. A footprint in the snow, just outside the back fence, too large to be ours deep, as if someone had been standing there a while. We all stared at it in silence. From that day on, we never opened the back blinds again. The leaning tree lost its charm. I stopped taking walks alone. I kept the front porch light on all night. We even got a motion sensor for the backyard. It never went off. But I always wondered if that was just because he'd found a place where the light didn't reach. The rest of the year passed quietly. No more sightings, no more shadows. But the unease never left. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night and swear I heard footsteps outside. I'd lie there, barely breathing, waiting. But the footsteps always faded. I graduated, moved away, built a new life. But even now, when I visit my hometown, I avoid that house. I drive past quickly, eyes fixed forward, and if I glance at the woods, I always find myself searching for that leaning tree. Part of me hopes it's been cut down. Part of me hopes it's still there, so I know where not to go. I've looked into police reports. No one else ever filed anything similar. No arrests, no leads, just stories, whispers, a few posts on local forums about strange figures seen in the trees. Nothing confirmed, nothing concrete. Some nights, I dream about that shadow. I see it in different places, in a parking lot, on a hiking trail, standing across from my bedroom window. I wake up sweating, heart racing, that same instinct rising from my bones. I don't know who he was, or why he watched, or how long he'd been doing it before I noticed. But I know this: danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just stands behind a tree waiting.